We are live.
Good morning, folks, and thanks for joining us at our planning committee meeting. I'm in the chair today because Mayor Davis is required to attend a Grand Bridge Energy quarterly board meeting, sends his regrets. I'm sure he'd rather be with us. We have the roll call.
Through the chair, roll has been taken.
I'd like to deal with the minutes. First of all, could I get a mover and seconder? Thank you. Councillor Carpenter, Councillor Sless. Any questions or corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, we'll go to the question on that, please.
The minutes carry unanimously on a recorded vote of 5-0. Those voting in favor are Councillor Sokoli, Sless, McCreary, Carpenter, Van Tilburg.
Thank you. And it's been a while since I've led a planning meeting, so you'll have to bear with me as I read this. So we have one public meeting on today's agenda. Public meetings are held in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act. The purpose of the hearing is to discuss the planning application and to hear from the public in support or against the application. At the end of the public meeting, the committee will pass a recommendation which is generally considered for a final decision at the next meeting of Brantford City Council. The names of anyone who speaks in regards to any item will appear within the meeting minutes. Anyone wishing notice of any further proceedings regarding the application should also provide their name and address to the clerk's office. We ask that members of the public in attendance today to speak to an item, please ensure that you add your contact info to the sign-in sheet, which is at the delegates table. Our order of operations, the applicant will speak first, followed by municipal staff, and then by members of the public. Each of the parties will have up to 10 minutes to speak, inclusive of questions from the committee. The applicant will then have a 5-minute period to provide clarification, if he or she wishes, to any questions or issues raised during the meeting. We're now going to move on to item 4.1. So could we have the applicant and or agent approach us before the committee? Your name and address for the record, please. And as a reminder, you have 10 minutes inclusive of any questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now it is.
Yes. Good morning, members of council, committee, city staff, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Julianne von Westerholt. I'm an associate at MHBC Planning, here this morning on behalf of my client, Ideal Capital, to present to you the proposed development for the lands known as Erie Ave, 264 Erie Ave. The site is approximately 1 acre in size and currently contains a 3.5-story single detached dwelling, approximately 12 to 12.5 meters in height. There are 2 single-story additions to the rear of the dwelling. The dwelling is not designated, nor is it listed on a heritage registry. The site has access onto Erie Ave and has approximately 2-meter grade change across the site and has trees both on the site and along the perimeter of the site. Next slide, please. Or do I control that? Okay. Let's see. All right. The proposed development for the subject lands consists of a 4-story apartment building containing 47 units with a mix of 1 and 2 bedrooms. The site will have 64 parking spaces, including visitor and barrier-free parking, and they are intended for a purpose-built rental. Before I get into more of the details of the site, I'd like to discuss the surrounding context of the property. The subject lands are situated within an established residential neighborhood, predominantly containing a mix of 1 and 2-story post-war homes. The subject lands are within 200 meters of transit stops and within a 5 to 10-minute walk to parks, community center, school, and commercial uses. The Grand River is approximately 800 meters to the west of the subject lands. The proposed development will require the demolition of the existing house to accommodate the new 4-story apartment building, approximately 14.8 meters in height. The apartment building is proposing to be positioned central to the site, thereby providing a larger separation from the properties to the south with numerous trees along the common property line, while also maintaining a healthy separation distance of 7.5 meters or about 25 feet from the northern property line. The proposed building proposes 47 units, including 1 and 2 bedrooms, 2 common indoor amenity areas, including a fitness room and a theater, a large common outdoor terrace and green roof amenity area, and individual private amenity spaces or balconies. The site proposes 64 parking spaces at a rate of 1.15 spaces per unit, including 10 visitor spaces and 2 barrier-free spaces, thereby reducing the need to solely rely on on-street parking to accommodate visitors to the site. Additionally, 10 bicycle parking spaces are provided to encourage active transportation as an alternative to the automobile. The development will improve the existing grades on the site so as to direct rainwater to drain towards the street. Approximately 34% of the site will be landscaped. The City of Brantford has intended this area as an intensification area since 2013, and through their recently reviewed official plan, the lands were designated as an intensification corridor, which is intended to be a new area for residential intensification, infill development, and redevelopment, and is intended to function as a connective spine of the city. This designation is intended to provide significant opportunities for creating vibrant, pedestrian, and transit-oriented places through investment in infrastructure, residential intensification, infill, and redevelopment. The subject lands are also within a strategic growth area designation, which is intended to accommodate significant growth in an intensified built form. The strategic growth areas play a crucial role in defining the planned urban structure of the city, in supporting a successful transit system, and in achieving the city's intensification and density targets. The official plan requires a minimum of 3 stories and permits a maximum of 6 stories in this area to encourage intensification to occur. Townhouses as a built form are not permitted in this designation. The proposed development is in keeping with the direction in the official plan, as it proposes the 4-story apartment building, which helps implement the vision for the intensification corridor. An official plan amendment is not required to permit this development. The subject lands also have access on a minor arterial road, which according to city transportation staff is intended to accommodate 20,000 vehicle trips per day. Currently, the trips average around 11,000 trips. The proposed development will generate 17 AM peak trips and 19 PM peak trips onto the minor arterial road, which only marginally adds to the daily volumes, which are well below the designed for 20,000 vehicles trips per day. Therefore, the addition of 47 units did not warrant a traffic impact study as part of the development submissions. The subject lands are currently zoned R1C on the northern portion and F-R1C on the southern portion of the subject lands. A zoning bylaw amendment application is required to implement the official plan direction and to permit the proposed development. The following site-specific regulations are being requested. Reduction in the minimum lot area per unit from 167 square meters to 88.68 square meters. Reduction in minimum amenity space per unit from 9 square meters to 8.75 square meters for an area of 411.8 square meters rather than 423 square meters collectively. And a reduction in parking from 1.5 spaces per unit to 1.36 spaces per unit. In conclusion, the proposal is consistent with the provincial policy statements. The proposal conforms to the growth plans for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. The intensification corridor designation permits this planned use. The development will implement the official plan vision of the strategic growth area and intensification corridor. The proposed 4-story building is less than the 6-story maximum that is already permitted in the official plan. There is a marginal increase in traffic on the minor arterial road, which has significant capacity to accommodate the development. The technical reports submitted with the application demonstrate that the existing infrastructure can support the new development. Thank you. This concludes my presentation, and I'm here for any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much for that.
You're
I
welcome.
see we have a couple of speakers in the queue. Councillor Carpenter, I saw your hand first. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you're gonna be, you're gonna go down and you're asking for reduction in parking spaces. Are you gonna be charging for the parking spaces on the property?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the intention is not to charge parking spaces for the parking.
And do you have a problem with that being written into the agreement? Because we're finding that a lot of rental apartments in the city that have been around for a long time, all of a sudden are charging for parking spaces.
To clarify, are you suggesting that they be leased out to others than those that are residing in the units? I mean,
No,
just want some
no, they're
clarification.
just all of a sudden charging for visitors to park when they come to visit someone. So PSWs, nurse care, home care comes, they've got to pay parking fees.
That's not my understanding, but I don't think that there would be an issue with that coming on title. Yeah.
Okay, and this is going to be entirely fenced, new fencing around, because you're abutting a lot of neighbors here.
Yes, I believe that the city will probably require fencing as an interim.
To the maximum height
yes,
and
yeah.
in a commercial value fencing,
I beg your pardon?
like a commercial fencing. So not your
Whatever
typical,
is decided at the site plan approval stage. It hasn't been determined at this point in time.
okay, and the ward councilors sign off on site plan too, so that they'll make sure that's happening, okay.
Mhm.
So the reduction in parking, you don't have a problem. These are gonna be rental units?
That's my understanding, yes.
And are they what rent, are they market rents? Are they geared income rents? What are they?
My understanding is that they would be market rent.
Okay, all right. And there's been no issue with the house being an older house or anything like that? No,
In-
no issue. You mentioned it wasn't designated, wasn't registered?
It was not designated or listed on a registry that I'm aware of.
Okay, and when do you want to be in the ground? When do you expect the completion date?
I don't have an answer for that right now. It probably would take, I mean, we have to go through the site plan approval process and then the building permit process, whatever. It probably within a year to start construction. Yeah.
And being rental units, does the builder have any other rental units anywhere that we can compare?
He is acquiring properties in other regions and other counties. I don't know of any other assets that they have that are already constructed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor, thank you. Are there any other folks interested in asking questions at this time? Okay, that's our 10-minute limit then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor.
Sean, are you looking after this one? Come on up, please.
Good morning, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Sean House. I'm a senior planner here at the city. With me, we have Joe Mito, the Manager of Development Planning. We're here because we received an application to amend the zoning bylaw at 264 Erie Avenue, which is to permit a 4-story apartment building with 47 units. This application was deemed complete on October 3rd of this year and has been processed within the 90-day timeframe now mandated by the Planning Act. The subject lands, whoops. The subject lands are located on the east side of Erie Avenue, south of Minturn Avenue, and north of Harriet Street. They have an area of approximately 1 acre with 32 meters of frontage along Erie Avenue. The lands currently contain a single detached dwelling, and the subject lands are surrounded by residential uses in all directions. Parsons Park is located further west and Bellevue Public School further south. The area is well served by transit, and the topography on the site gradually slopes upwards from the southeast to the northwest. Here's a photo of the property that was taken from Erie Avenue. And this photo was taken from the rear of the site. As mentioned, 47 apartment dwelling units are proposed within a 4-story building with 1 vehicle access off of Erie Avenue. 64 off-street parking spaces are proposed, and an amenity area is to be located on the north side of the site, and each unit will have their own private balcony. Here's a rendering of what the east and west elevation will look like. The west elevation is what you will see from Erie Avenue. Here's a rendering of the north elevation. As you can see, on the left of this slide, there's an overhang of the parking area, which will be on the east side of the property. And lastly, a rendering of the south elevation. The lands are designated intensification corridor in the official plan and is considered a strategic growth area with 15,000 homes to be built within the built boundary of Brantford. This is one of those areas proposed to accommodate that. The designation permits residential units in mid-rise apartment buildings as proposed and limits building heights on Erie Avenue to 6 stories. The southeastern portion of the site is within Special Policy Area 1, which wouldn't permit basements or more sensitive land uses. The proposed R4B32 zone would recognize the proposed apartment use and establish site-specific provisions to recognize a reduction to minimum lot area, amenity area, parking space ratio, and drive aisle width. As previously mentioned, a holding provision is recommended to require an archaeological assessment on the property prior to development. In terms of development considerations, the applicant had submitted an urban design report in support of the proposal, which demonstrated compatibility with our urban design manual and the surrounding neighborhood. The applicant had originally proposed a 5-story building at a different location through the pre-consultation process, but revised their design to better align with our urban design guidelines, in particular the 45-degree angular plane, which is shown on this slide, which is implemented to reduce privacy and shadowing impacts. An arborist report was submitted with the application, which inventoried 66 trees on or adjacent to the subject lands and found that 18 trees could be retained and 48 would need to be removed to accommodate the development. Slight revisions to the site design are recommended to mitigate damage to neighboring trees. Transportation staff have reviewed the application and found that the amount of traffic expected to be generated from the proposed development would be minimal in comparison to the overall capacity of Erie Avenue. It was also found that the amount of parking proposed is in keeping with the demand that was determined through several parking studies completed within the city for some similar developments. And our transportation project manager is here and can speak more to this if there are questions. In terms of cultural heritage, the subject property was reviewed as part of the city's Heritage Register project, but was found to not meet enough criteria to be recommended for listing. This is discussed in further detail in the staff report, and we do have long-range planning staff here to assist if there are questions about that. Last but not least, a noise feasibility study was conducted to analyze traffic noise impacts on the proposal and made recommendations that can be pursued and implemented through site plan control. This application was circulated to all property owners within 120 meters of the site, and the map on this slide illustrates that radius. Other members of the public who had attended a neighborhood meeting on November 21st and signed in were also notified of this meeting. And comments heard at the neighborhood meeting, as well as written comments received by staff, relate to what's listed on this slide and were included in the staff report. A few of the issues on this slide I've spoken to as development considerations, but I'll add that grading and drainage and minimizing privacy impacts can be implemented through site plan control through things such as fencing and additional landscaping. And that concerns relating to previous wastewater capacity issues have since been resolved in the area. The local school boards were notified of this application, and proper notice of this public meeting was given in accordance with the Planning Act. Local First Nations were circulated on the application in accordance with the Grand River Notification Agreement and provided comment requesting an archaeological assessment and that has been included as a condition of holding. Just for our standard land calculation slide, if the same number of units were built as single detached units on the smallest size lot currently permitted in the city, almost 2 more acres of land would be required, and that's not taking into consideration additional roads and infrastructure. With that, I'd like to conclude that this application is consistent with provincial policy, the growth plan, and the city's official plan. The proposal supports the appropriate development of an underutilized site. And planning staff recommend that application PZ 1423 be approved. And we're happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Sean, thank you very much. We have just under 2 minutes left. We have 2 speakers. Could I get a mover and seconder to extend the time by another 10 minutes? Councillor Carpenter, Councillor Sless, and we'll just do the vote with a show of hands, if that's okay with you. Those in favor, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. So we will, just bear with me a second till I restart this. Councillor Sokoli, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair McCreary. Few questions. With the floodplain, there's no basements allowed in part of the building. So is the other part of the building going to have a basement and then this imaginary line and then there's no basement? Is that how that works, or is there no basement throughout?
From what I understand, there's no basement throughout.
Okay. And then the next question is, has this gone to Heritage Committee? The building itself has this very elegant appearance that looks like there may be some.
No, through the chair, it has not.
It has not. Okay. And then just one last question. I noticed in the comments from Grand Erie that we're going to be putting a warning clause. This isn't even really specific to the site, but there's a warning clause that the schools in the area are at or over capacity. Is that standard practice? Do we do that all the time?
Through you, Chair, we've been receiving those comments fairly recently from the school board. They tell us what the capacity of their schools in the area are. And now we're finding if they are over capacity, they'll request a warning clause on title through the site plan agreement.
And this would be with every lease? They would have to sign?
Yeah, it could be on the lease agreement or the purchase and sale agreement. In this case, it would be lease.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sless, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a number of questions, but I'll wait till we get to the debate part and get clarification at that time. The school situation, it's only addressed by the public school board. What about the separate school board?
Through you, Chair, they were circulated on the application, but we did not receive comment.
So we don't know whether they have a capacity or whether they don't.
We do not.
Okay. A more general question. When I looked through the comments of the neighborhood meeting, there was concerns that a number of people that thought they should be invited weren't invited because they weren't within the 120-meter radius that typically we circulate for notification. Is that a city policy or is that directed by the province, and is that the minimal?
Through you, Chair, the neighborhood meeting policy is a city policy. It's in the official plan. It's not a statutory requirement. We do it above and beyond the Planning Act, but we base our circulation radius on the Planning Act requirements for the stat meeting. So 120 meters.
Okay, and the Planning Act requirements, basically that's the minimum you have to advise. Is that correct?
That's
You
correct.
can go beyond that, but you can't go below that.
Right.
Okay. It seems to be a common thing that I hear that I didn't know. My neighbor had to tell me because I wasn't invited. Is that something we can consider it moving forward, looking at the radius to see if perhaps we should be reaching further out? I'll let you consider that, and I'll take an email back on that. Like that's fine. There was talk about the border trees, and there could be problems with the with construction, with the root system and killing trees that are not necessarily on this property, but on adjacent properties. Correct?
Through you, Chair, an arborist report was submitted inventoried all the trees on the property as well as neighboring trees that might be impacted by the proposed development and made recommendations to ensure that no trees that aren't on the property would be harmed.
So if a neighboring tree is a casualty during this construction, what's the recourse?
Through the chair, Gary Peever, Manager of Development Engineering. When it comes to the neighboring property trees, typically that does become a private matter between the two adjacent landowners. However, through the site plan process, we ensure the developer provides a tree protection plan as reviewed by the arborist to ensure that if construction is happening, there are mitigation measures to occur. But typically that would be a private matter between the two adjacent landowners on those private trees.
Okay, because I've always been told by bylaw enforcement that if somebody's tree is hanging over into my property and I knock a branch off because it's putting things into my swimming pool that I don't want there, if I kill that tree, I'm responsible. So I'm going to assume that if I'm building something and I dig in the ground and I kill the tree because of I've disturbed the roots, even though I've taken mitigation measures, I would be responsible. Is that not, am I not understanding the law?
Through the chair, we could provide clarification back to you, via bylaw and forestry in our department. But typically, again, there would have to be proof, and usually the city's not getting involved when it comes to damaging of two private trees.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Beaver. I've got a ton more. I'll ask one more and then when we get into debate, I'll ask the rest, Mr. Chair. But could you clarify for me, the minimum lot requirement is supposed to be 167 square meters per unit. It's going down to 88 square meters per unit, which is, it's cut in half, literally. Can you explain the justification for that?
Yes, through you, Chair, when the minimum lot requirement was considered for this zone as the base zone, the R4B zone, it really wasn't intended for intensification corridors and had those types of more intense residential uses in mind. But since then, our official plan has been updated, envisioning accommodating the growth of the city within intensification corridors. And a lot of zoning bylaws have actually moved away from minimum lot areas for apartment uses. The total size of the lot's not necessarily indicative of how many apartment units it can accommodate. So staff saw the reduction as appropriate.
Okay, thank you. One last one, Mr. Chair, and I've got to ask this, and it's probably not a fair question to ask you, but it's always been my understanding that any development should be sympathetic to the existing landscape. So in other words, you wouldn't put a Walmart in the middle of a subdivision because it wouldn't make sense. It doesn't fit into the character of that neighborhood. Help me understand how putting a high-rise building in the middle of single-family detached homes is sympathetic to the existing neighborhood.
So through the chair to the councillor, Nicole Wilmot, Director of Planning and Development Services. Excuse me. So that's a great question with respect to compatibility. So as you know, the applicants did go through an urban design brief, and that brief is consistent with the policies and the design that we look for. And we are taking into consideration the buffering on the property. So that'll include the street trees and so on, and those boundary trees to protect in terms of that mitigation and privacy. But really, it is a much bigger question in terms of what you're asking, and it kind of comes down to the structure in our new official plan. So when you consider that the city of Brantford is required to accommodate significant population growth over the next 30 years, and I think it's fair to assume that growth will not stop at that marker, but that's really just our planned horizon. We're looking at accommodating over that time roughly 30,000 new homes in the city of Brantford. 15,000 of those will likely be located in the boundary expansion lands, and 15,000 probably more will be located within our existing built boundary. Our planned structure is to include the majority of that growth within our intensification corridors and our strategic growth areas. These areas will transition in terms of the look and feel of them over time, as they are the appropriate locations for that significant intensified growth to meet our current population projections. We fully anticipate that our population and projections will increase over time. We will likely see that. And we're also growing at a much faster rate than what the province anticipated. So in terms of compatibility, what we'll likely see are these are the first applications that will be paving the way for what will likely become the planned corridor and the urban fabric of these intensification corridors, because the intent is to keep this style of development outside of the stable residential neighborhoods. So if you go back to our land use map where you see our schedule from the official plan, you notice in terms of the color coordination, we see those dark yellow corridors on our main arterial and minor arterial roads. The intent there and those neighborhoods remain that soft yellow. The purpose of that is, as I said, is to keep that intensified growth outside of the inner core of our stable residential neighborhoods and locate them on those corridors where they have sufficient access to transit and within, a walking distance of amenities. And as those areas transition over time, we will continue to see an increase in residential units, but also the amenities that support them. So I hope that answers your question.
I think so. If I could just go a little further with that, Nicole. So if I lived in this corridor in proximity to where this development is taking place, would it be safe for me to assume that I'm going to see a lot more houses knocked down and apartment buildings going up in their place?
I think in terms of your question, I think that these areas are planned for significant change and growth. I think that every application needs to be evaluated on the merits of that specific application. But I do think it's safe to say that these areas are intended to transition over time to support the growth that we know is coming to this community.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Counselor, thank you. Further questions of staff? Counselor Van Tilburg, would you like to move an additional extension of an unlimited extension, please? And I'll need a seconder.
An unlimited extension, please. Looking for a seconder.
Counselor Sless is the seconder. Show of hands vote. Those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. Counselor Van Tilburg, you have the floor.
Thank you. Many of my queries have thankfully been addressed by the councillor and staff. Road expansion. What other intensification corridor is a 2-lane road?
Through the chair to the counselor, I'd have to come back to you with a list. I'm running through the arterial roads and minor arterials in my head and thinking of where we're seeing 2-lane roads, but I can get back to you with a definitive list. I don't want to speak out of turn.
Oh, very good. I have done that in the past and learned my lesson from such. 2051 is the projected time to widen the roads. In the meantime, we have numerous developments up along that intensification corridor and in subdivisions coming in just outside of that corridor. The residents would be bound by the growth before the roads expanded. Would that be correct?
So through the chair to the counselor, you're right in terms of the long-term protection of the widening for 2051, but the 2051 number is not necessarily a static number. It's a number that we assess over time as the rate of growth increases. So if our rate of growth continues to increase at the accelerated rate that we are currently seeing this year and looking in terms of trending over the next 5 years, then it's likely that those road improvements will happen sooner rather than later. So it is a number and it's a target, but the municipality monitors the growth and the rate of growth and the need for future improvements. We wouldn't necessarily put them off just because that number is indicated. We would monitor the need based on the rate of growth and the densities we're seeing in that area.
All right. When I consider intensification corridors and growth, I've been involved in some specific ones, particularly the Canadian Tire intensification development there. And the apartment buildings that are across from Earl Haig Pool, those are significant infills. if that's an intensification corridor along Colburn Street, are those not stacked townhouses in there?
Through the chair to the counselor. So we've had the debate about the Colburn Street and whether or not they're stacked towns or just towns. But I think in terms of the built form, we do have policies in our official plan where not every intensification corridor measures up the same way. So in terms of Erie Ave, given that it is a minor arterial, we're looking at a lower rise intensified built form versus what could be permitted on a site like Canadian Tire. And there's actually land use approvals in place there where we can see high rise, right? So I think in that site, there is a combination of both the built forms. We don't anticipate that level of intensification on Erie Ave. It's a much lower rise intensified built form.
Well,
based
thank you
on-
with that, because this is where I become puzzled. I didn't realize the intensification corridor boundaries zigzag on Erie Ave, that there is part that is not done. And so when I see I see townhouse, I see single family homes being built on Erie Ave. I see townhouses being built on Erie Ave. I see stacked townhouses being built on Erie Ave in a community that is generally a core of single family homes in that area. And yet here we have a very dense area of single family homes. And we're expected, like when I can get 27 units off of one house on Erie Ave in townhouses, stacked townhouses, 9 units off of one house. And then the public see that happening and then they're told, no, there can be no such thing on this property. It's a hard one to wrap your head around. Why is that? Why is it that you will have any builds further that hit that magic yellow line of the intensification corridor not being those types of builds that are happening just down a block away?
So through the chair to the counselor, the designation for the intensification corridor runs the entirety of essentially 7 Erie, that development all the way almost to Burkett Lane.
Almost.
Yeah, almost all the way to Burkett Lane. It comes close. It takes into consideration the lot fabric and what could ultimately be considered in this area. We also start to run into more restrictive policies with respect to floodplain analysis and so on. So what could actually accommodate there? The intention is that the policy allows for a range of built form. What you're seeing is the market and the development community, moving forward with applications that, for various reasons are able to make viable depending on a multitude of factors. So I think it's safe to say that while these corridors are planned for significant growth, and that's where we are ultimately looking to accommodate them, the policies do still have a level of flexibility where you can see some smaller or even larger scale intensification projects come forward. And then we evaluate those based on those policies and bring them forward to this committee for recommendation.
Good. I'm hoping to see some flexibility on this development. 66 trees, 18 retained, 48 removed. What's the replacement rate on the trees?
Through the chair, there is no replacement rate currently in any of the city's private tree bylaws.
So they're just gone. I thought we were trying to, we're having meetings a week later about expanding and protecting our tree canopy. How does this help protect our tree canopy?
Through the chair, you are correct in speaking in regards to the tree canopy in the private tree bylaw that's looking to be updated. Part of the reason why of updating that private tree bylaw are for these situations. So again, the city doesn't have a defined rule under our bylaws for replacement value for this particular property. It only covers the existing woodlots in the existing bylaw.
All right, and then previous developments, I believe in West Brant, there was a request from Six Nations of the Grand River, if I recall correctly, for a ratio of 10-1 to be considered as tree replacement. Has that been mentioned in any degree within correspondence regarding the number of trees being removed and replacing?
Through you, Chair, it has not.
Okay. You come up with a different average for what your study says for residential or apartment building residential parking. And that it is actually lower than the 1.36 being asked, and yet our policy is 1.5. When you're doing these studies, are you merely going over what was passed? Because I think each area is taken in its by its location. In other words, some areas are not conducive to having a rate of 1.5, others may be more. But what we deal with as counselors is the realistic aspect of our count isn't in the policy, our count is on the street. And what happens is the citizens often call us afterwards saying, look, there are far more cars than the 1.5, even let alone the 1.36. And they'll be parking on the streets. And the concern being we have 2-lane roads all around and already limited parking. So how do we address this aspect?
Through the chair, Jeff Cornwell, Project Manager, Development Transportation. When we did the staff initiated 14 parking studies, we looked for anyone who was parking, who looked like they were obviously parking on the street near those developments, and we included those in our numbers. For this example, Erie Ave does not permit parking, and we're with this parking ratio, we feel that we're comfortable with it, that it would not encourage people to be parking on streets like Minturn and through the surrounding area.
All right.
And
Thank
I'd
you.
like to add here, Counselor, if I may, to answer your question, that parking study was actual. We went out and
That's what I'm
counted.
asking.
Yeah, we went out
Physical study.
at various times of the night and day to count the parked cars of actual places within the city of Brantford.
Thank you very much. Very much appreciate that answer.
Counselor, thank you. Counselor Carpenter, you have the floor.
A perfect segue. Thank you, Counselor. And that's what I wanted to address as well. In the report, it says part of the research you investigated 14 sites within the city, and most of these sites being apartment buildings. The studies found that peak parking demand was considered less than our zoning bylaw requirement. So in future, our zoning bylaw requirement is going to be less, correct?
Through the chair, that is correct. We are looking in our draft zoning bylaw to have 1 space per unit plus 0.15 spaces for visitors for an apartment building for a total parking ratio of 1.15.
And I know it says many of the newer sites, but I have an older site in my ward, 661 West Street, who's trying to charge residents for parking. So I've been there after midnight many times in the last 2 weeks. And I found the same thing. I count 50 empty parking spaces every night. So your analysis also, maybe we should be looking at older buildings to see if that is reflected right across the city, because I think it is. I think your numbers are correct that we have that parking restrictions. And the other question I have, two more questions, Mr. Chair. You did a fine job, by the way. The second question relates to the official plan. So when the official plan is finalized, would this application even be necessary?
So through the chair to the counselor, the official plan has been approved. I think what you're referring to is the draft zoning bylaw.
Yeah.
So with respect to the draft zoning bylaw, I'll let Sean sort of chime in on that.
But I think I'm sharing that work.
Yeah. Through you, Chair, the proposed zone in the new draft zoning bylaw will be an actual intensification corridor zone, which would be permissive of this use.
Okay, now, having said that, and to the Councillor Celeste's question, that's my third and final question. When we go out for the draft zoning bylaws, we need to expand the 120 meters right across the area where this is changing. So especially intensification corridors. So you need to be 120 meters from the entire intensification zone when notification to the public to what can go there, and it needs to be pretty Reader's Digest version description, like high-rise development can occur here, that what can occur there. So that property owners in the surrounding areas know what to expect as opposed to being surprised. I think that will make things easier going forward. So I'd like to, just wanted to plant that seed. And that Councillor Celeste sort of brought it up about expanding the knowledge area. So, as chair of that committee, I'm just trying to get ahead of it. Thanks.
Counselor, thank you. Before I go back to Counselor Sluss, I have a few questions I'd like to pose. I'll start with the easy ones first. My visit to the site was, I had to make 2 trips because I didn't see a big yellow sign. Are we not using big yellow signs anymore?
Through you, Chair, no, we have a new design.
Why is that?
It. Go ahead.
To the chair, Joe Muno, Manager of Development Planning. In an effort to modernize and involve residents, we've updated the signs on site. So the city staff help prepare the sign. The applicants go and put the sign on site. And also, as we continue to modernize that, we are looking for QR codes, makes it more accessible for folks that have a phone and want to see more detailed information with respecting these various development proposals within the city that do require Planning Act and council approvals.
So can you change the background color to yellow?
Through you, Chair, that's something we could definitely look into, yes.
Is that a yes?
Sure.
Thank you. They look like real estate signs or any other sort of advertising sign. They're not readily apparent. And that's probably why there's so many calls about people that didn't get notification, because it's just not visible enough. With respect to tree protection, just to be clear, the applicant is not required to produce a tree protection plan for the neighboring properties, correct?
Through the chair, when the applicant comes back through the site plan, they will be required to provide a tree protection plan that does consider neighboring properties.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Now, with respect to the statutory powers of this committee, we've heard comments from the proponent that they will not be selling these as condominiums. We've heard comments from the proponent that they will not be charging beyond the rent for parking spaces. And I'm wondering, and we've also heard that there's no need for a heritage impact assessment. So I'm wondering if it's within the power of this committee to incorporate a regulation that they cannot become condos, that they cannot charge for parking, and that they must provide a heritage impact assessment. Is that within our ability to ask for that stuff today?
Through the chair, we can look into whether we can include that in the site plan control agreement while as we're in the process of updating the agreements at the moment. This is something we're considering. So we have not included this kind of thing in the past, but it's definitely something that we can consider at this time.
Nicole?
Sure. So just to follow up on the HIA, the question was also asked earlier whether or not this property went to the Heritage Committee. And while the answer was correct in that no, it did not, we did actually assess this property through our Heritage Registry program. And so through that process, we determined that with the assistance of our consultants, that this property did not meet the merits for designation or listing. As you may be aware, the province has significantly sort of recently increased the requirements for listing a property as well as designating a property. And it's our determination that based on the work that we've done, that this property would not merit inclusion on the listing or on the register.
Thank you for that. So to be clear then, can this committee today impose conditions that this building cannot be condominiumized?
So through to the chair, I think we heard from legal counsel that I think while that's not a standard process, I think they will review and consider. More likely it will come through the requirements of the site plan and the site plan agreement versus the zoning. It's not tenure of a property is not something that we consider as part of zoning, nor is it applicable in the Planning Act. But it may be a matter that could be incorporated as a condition or a provision in the site plan agreement. And it may be, I do get myself confused, but if there is an opportunity to ask the applicant's agent whether or not the property owner would be amenable to that kind of provision, then we can also maybe seek some clarification there.
And that would hold true also for an assertion that they would not charge visitor or tenant parking in addition to rents?
To the chair, understanding what Councillor Carpenter's concerns have been within the last couple of weeks, I have been speaking with technical staff as well as legal counsel regarding our new standardized site plan control agreement. And that is something that we are endeavoring to look into on these types of developments to ensure that condo boards, property managers, landlords are not going to be charging additional parking rates for their tenants and ownership.
Thank you for that. And let me ask one more time. I understand that the corporation of the city of Brantford has deemed that this building has no heritage value, but is it within the statutory powers of this committee to request as part of the H that a heritage impact assessment be completed by the proponent?
To the chair, yes, it is within the authority of this committee.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps one of the members may suggest that. And those are my questions. Thank you. Were there any other questions from members of committee? Councillor Celeste, thank you.
Just a couple, since we're exhausting things. I'll just carry on. The parking spaces, I'm still trying to get my head around that. At 64, it's supposed to be 71. Of the 64, how many are accessible parking spots and how many are visitor parking spots?
Through you, Chair, the required amount of accessible spaces would be 4%. So.
Okay.
So
two?
Oh, there will be 2 accessible parking spaces provided. Currently, our zoning bylaw does not require visitor parking spaces to be marked with like a sign or a V. But as part of a site plan application, we will be asking for a certain number of parking spaces to be labeled or marked as visitor parking.
Do we have a number for that certain amount?
We're looking for 15% roughly.
15%? Okay. How many of the units are accessible units?
Through the chair to Councillor Celeste, I don't believe the applicant has determined that. But going on some history and examples in previous similar developments, if in fact the rental units are going to be rental, the Building Code Act, I believe, requires 15% of the build to be accessible units. There is no requirement if it does go to a condominium, but through our accessibility coordinator and the site plan control process, we always encourage that you provide accessible units.
So if you're talking about 15% accessible units, but then we're talking about 4% of the parking be accessible, the two don't match.
Through the chair to the councillor, that's correct. It does not match, but once again, at the site plan control stage, the accessibility coordinator raises that as an issue, and most often the development industry does comply with providing additional parking stalls for the accessible units.
Okay, thanks for that, Joe. And then just finally, the trips generated. I'm having trouble understanding that. Because of this proposal being considered, 17 AM trips additional will be generated onto Erie Ave, and 19 PM trips additional will be added onto the street. I'm wondering, is it assumed then that more than half these people will be retired?
Through the chair.
Nobody's going to work.
Through the chair, those numbers are for a 1 hour period looking at historical data. But not everyone starts work at the same time. So these trips are spread out through a 2 or 3 hour peak in the morning and the afternoon. We expect the site to generate approximately 200 trips per day.
Okay, it's misleading when I read it that there's 17 additional AM and 19 additional PM trips generated.
That would be during the peak hour of the road.
That's during your busiest time.
So for example, from maybe 7:30 to 8:30 in the morning, and then again from maybe 5 to 6 in the afternoon. That's just an hourly number.
Okay, it's confusing reading the report because it doesn't, when I read it, I think that's in totality. And there's nothing there to tell me it's not. So it's a confusing report when I read it. So if there's a way to clarify that, that maybe the total number of trips generated would be roughly 200, most of them happening in this hour here, then that would, for a simple mind like mine, that would work. I would get that, but reading this, I didn't get it. So, but I appreciate the clarification. And if going forward, we can make that a little more clear, I think that would be of help. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Council. With the leave of committee, we'll move on to hear from the public. So I'm going to ask now if there are members of the public that would like to speak to the item today. Do we have anybody virtually? We have one virtually. Okay. I think maybe we'll go to the virtual first, if we can do that.
Members of the public who are attending virtually, if you can use the raise hand function virtually, if you'd like to speak.
Members of the audience, there will be an opportunity to speak as soon as we hear from the people that have logged on via Zoom.
And Mr. Chair, it does not appear that they are looking to speak at this time.
So our virtual attendee is just an observer, I guess. So let me ask now if there are any members of the public who would like to speak to the application. Please come forward to the delegates table one at a time. Tell us your name and your mailing address. And as a reminder, you each will have 10 minutes inclusive of questions to present. So now's your opportunity. Is there anybody that would like to speak? Yeah, please have a seat there, sir. The microphone is live. You'll see the red light is lit. Give us your name and address and you have 10 minutes.
Richard Pipe, 267 Erie Avenue, Brantford, Ontario, Canada. English only. Okay. My one concern is about the 40 to 50 cars coming in from the other side of the river almost continually. And people on Erie Ave are supposed to accommodate them by letting them line up from one stop sign and one stoplight to the other, solid, so that nobody can left turn through when they're trying to get out of the city or go left off those lanes. You get 40, 50 people lined up on each way. You can't move. And I don't know where this consultant that did the traffic control down there, where he did it, maybe over at Mohawk Chapel, I don't know. But it's garbage the way it is right now. And it's gonna get worse. Especially when you're worried, you're so worried about having so many people have a house. What's going on? I mean, you can build houses, you can bring boatloads of people in, and naturally you're gonna need more houses. You're gonna need more food. So that part doesn't hold water, I don't think. But, and then on the snow removal, what are you gonna do in snow removal in regards to this complex here? Are they gonna take the snow and push it into a bucket and cart it away immediately? Or are they gonna push it like they do now? They gather from the center, push it each side, and throw it up on the front lawns, halfway up to the front of a house, and leave it. And then what gets left on the road, now you've only got two lanes, one going each way. Where's the rest of the snow gonna go? you're raving about this great, highway that we have there. Through highway that they say is only a street when you wanna ticket somebody. So I don't know who did your consultant? I wish they'd have stayed in Toronto. But that's one of the main things that when I was watching all the great speech there, I thought, well, where I come out of the driveway every day and I back in, I had an extra wide driveway put at the front of the curb so that I could back in easier. I got done for the neighbor the same way, and they fixed them up good. So now, but we still have to back in because we can't back out on Erie Ave and expect to, within half an hour, be able to move. But I don't know what the answer is, other than get rid of some of and Minturn Ave, one of the main ones. How are we going to help people over there and on the other way? With fire trucks getting down through Minturn Ave, once you get all these other people, oh, they've got to have a parking spot. You're cutting down the parking spaces on the property itself. I have a building on 6th Ave, and it was 1.5 when that was built for parking. Now we still, every unit has two cars. So the 1.5 is sure as hell isn't gonna work in this place. What if they got 5 kids? They'll have 5 cars, because they can't walk, heaven forbid. Same as when they go to school. Every one of them gotta have somebody drive them to school because it's a terrible neighborhood, you know. But that's, my main concern was the snow and the flood of traffic that comes from the other side of, outside the river, the other side of the river, and just plugs up the whole city. Because I don't know can somebody, when you can get a consultant in from Toronto to do it, set up a way that there's going to be a direct route from Erie Ave and the Coxet Bridge to go through the city to the right or left and able to get through there in a decent fashion. Not every street light has, or stop sign or traffic light. They're bouncing along it's good for your brakes. I mean, it keeps them loose, you know, but it's just garbage as far as I'm concerned. Okay? That's about the only one right now. I'll be back.
Thank you, sir. Just hang on a second, please. And I should say that the consultant, the proponent may answer your questions during an opportunity for them to come back up and clarify. Are there questions? Councillor Celeste, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Mr. Pipe. I haven't seen you in a long time.
Well,
It's
it's been a
good to see you.
while.
Yeah.
Takes a while to get out of the drive.
Well, there you go. So in this format, we can't directly respond back to you, but we can do is once we get back to staff, we can ask the questions that you've been asking and you'll hear your answers. Just so you understand the way it works here.
Well,
So you'll get an answer to the
I-
questions. You pose
I
some and we'll,
wonder whether it works or not anyway, because
Yep.
we don't see too many people, you know, they kind of hide. And then they say, well, it was like, how many people do you see that have come in from Toronto, the great Toronto, moved out to Mount Pleasant, built their nice big house there because they got it so much cheaper than Toronto. Now, every day they go over the Lorne Bridge, try to get over the Lorne Bridge, which was designated a couple of years ago to be repaired. But now they want to go to Toronto within a half an hour to get back to their job.
Right. Yeah.
Stay the hell in Toronto and work there.
Unfortunately, we can't dictate that, but
Well-
we'll get answers to your question.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
Counselor Van Tilburg, you had a question?
Yes, I have a question in that. My question is, I want to publicly apologize for cutting you off at our public meeting. No, just, I heard about it and I'm glad you got the rest of your say, sir.
Thanks again, sir, for your presentation. Let me ask if there's any other member of the public that would like to come up and speak. Yes, ma'am. Approach. We know who you are, but you have to tell us your name and your address anyway. And then you have 10 minutes inclusive of questions.
My name is Sandra Bigger. I live at 92 Superior Street in Brantford. And that's about it. I have 11 items that come right from your agenda that I'd like to see addressed, and I don't think we have time to cover all of them. But I will start and I will do the best I can to get as many of them covered as I can. I may have to go forward later. The one thing I'm interested in is this is a planning committee meeting and you do not worry about quorums on these meetings, apparently. Okay, because this is new to me. I've never seen a meeting where quorum isn't 6 people.
Ma'am, we are a 6-member committee.
Mhm.
We're a subcommittee of council. We
Okay.
have quorum. Please proceed. And,
Okay.
and as I mentioned earlier, we're not going to be answering your questions
No.
that you're posing. That may come later, okay?
Okay, now this intensification corridor thing. Is it a part of what the province downloaded from us, or is it a part of the city plan? I'm confused because you've discussed both ways of handling it. I'd like a little more information on that. The official plan seems to be the one that overrides this intensification thing. And it's also, you've also mentioned that it's been formalized and it hasn't been formalized. So I'm just trying to figure out exactly what we have in hand that we're dealing with. Okay, in terms of item number 7.1, it says directly on there, the goal is to build a greener Brantford. How is adding 47 units of a 4-story apartment building and paving green space, creating a greener Brantford? Also, and 8.2 mentions the remaining trees. 66 are mentioned as being inventoried, 48 are going to be removed, and apparently they don't have to replace any of these trees. How is this going to help with the climate control, the climate change control that we're dealing with right now? This is a real issue and we're pretending to close our eyes and it's not happening. It is happening and it's happening now. So I'm just wondering what we're doing to take care of that. Section 3.3, it says there's going to be a marginal effect on traffic flow. When was the study done? What was the time of day? How many days was it studied and who studied it? Anybody that lives in that area will tell you. And Mr. Pipe said it properly. Sometimes it takes 15 to 20 minutes to get onto Erie Ave. I don't live directly on Erie, but I find when I'm trying to go on Erie Ave and get down to Clarence, it takes quite a bit of time at certain times of the day. And I'm just wondering who and when and how this study was done. Item 9.34 is the parking issue. It includes the guest parking, obviously. What is 0.36 of a car? I've never driven in one, but I'd sure like to know what it looks like. Where will they park? You've mentioned that there are parking spots that are available. They aren't enough. They aren't sufficient for every unit to have a car because they have guest parking and they have special parking. So where are these excess cars going to go? 9.3.6 dealt with noise prevention for the building. What about the noise prevention for the neighboring homes in the area? It said there's going to be double pane glass and that sort of thing to keep the noise from the building. But how is that going to help the neighbors? The neighbors are still going to have the noise of the people, of the vehicles, and of the air conditioning units that are going to be running quite frequently during the summertime? And how are they going to have protection from the noise? You've covered the building, let's cover the neighbors as well. 9.41, there were no comments from transportation, utilities, fire department, accessibility, and the police department was conspicuously absent from that list. No one had any comments whatsoever to make on what's going to happen when this building comes into play. I'm quite surprised. I would have expected some comments. The warning clause for the residents in the leases. Has anybody done this in Ontario? Has it been tested? Like, I would think this wouldn't stand a court challenge. I don't think that you could tell somebody that, by the way, the schools aren't going to be available for your children because they're at capacity. Your children will have to go to the other side of Brantford to get their education. I really think that if there's a court challenge on this, the city of Brantford will lose. Okay, on that area still, the housing department, it also discusses the fact that they are pointing out to the people that are building that there are incentives for affordable housing, and suggests that the owner maybe take a look at these incentives and decide what this building's going to look like. This, to me, is a huge tipping point for this area. There's quite a difference between affordable housing in a big building like that, in a single family area, and a housing that's market value apartments. And I think we have to be aware of this. The other thing I'm interested in is, what is the definition of affordable housing? I've asked this several times before and haven't been able to get any satisfaction of what actually is affordable housing. Is it geared to income? Is it lower than market rent? I'd like to have a little definition of what affordable housing is. Let's see, item number 11. The last line of the last line of that particular item says that greenhouse gas emissions will increase during the building phase of this. What is being done to limit and mitigate these emissions? They're going to be happening. The city has acknowledged they're happening. What are we doing to limit them and to perhaps mitigate them? This is during the building phase. 12.0 says that this area is comparable with the surrounding neighbor, this planned build. How can you say it's comparable? This is an area of single family homes on the whole. How can you possibly say that this unit is comparable to what is in that neighborhood now? And ultimately, when it comes right down to it, how is this helping the housing crisis in Brantford? The housing crisis is more the low end. That's more where we need the housing. But where are we going to put the low end housing hasn't been determined. And this is not addressing low end housing. It's supposedly addressing market rent. So how is this helping the housing crisis? Thank you so much for your time. I did get through all 11 units.
Just hang on one second. Let's see if there are any questions, Sandra. It appears not. Thank you very much. And perhaps your questions will be answered during the remainder of the hearing today. Do we have anyone else in the audience that would like to come forward and speak? I'll reiterate, sir, if you could help, let us have your name and address, and then you'll have 10 minutes to speak, inclusive of any questions. Please go ahead when you're ready.
My name is Tom Dinsmore. I live at 105 Minturn Ave. Some of my questions have been answered, but I'd like to support some of them. The parking is not compatible for that building down there. I've watched before. The snow removal is a prime one. Where do they put the snow? They never remove it the same day. So that means 2 spaces the first snowfall, 3 the next. You're going to eat up those parking spots. 1.5 will not cover it, in my opinion. I've also heard about the traffic on Erie Ave, and it is quite true in the morning. I don't know where that study came from, but I think it needs to be readdressed. In the mornings, you can sit there 2, 3, 5 minutes waiting to get through, to get out onto Erie Ave, even to make a right-hand turn off Minturn Ave. Don't worry about trying to cross it. It is unbelievable. The other thing I haven't heard addressed is some of the things that the impact this is gonna have on the neighborhood. I don't know how you would feel if you lived on Minturn Ave or were looking at a house on Minturn Ave, a single family dwelling, and now you're gonna look at a 4-story building in behind it and a parking lot with lighting, with noise from cars moving, the number of people over there. You can put your fence up, you can put your trees up, but you can't stop someone, you can't put it 4 stories high so that you have privacy in your backyard. So that is gonna lead directly to what's gonna happen to the value of those homes down the road. Has anybody looked at that at all? Because I know if I was buying a house, it would significantly drop in value with that. It just seems there hasn't been a lot of things looked at here that need to be addressed, like the traffic study and the parking down there. There is no parking on Minturn Ave now, or very, very little of it, and that is going to increase. It's gonna be hell down there. We got the school problem down there. Now we're gonna have buses stopping on Erie Ave in the mornings to load kids up to transport them across town or wherever they do. That's only gonna compound the problems there. You got the noise when they clear snow in the wintertime. I don't want to listen to backup beepers all night long. I'm sure you wouldn't want to either. Those are just some of the ones. A lot of the other ones have been addressed here today, but those are some that I had. I thank you for your time.
Thank you for that, sir. Are there questions? Seeing none, I'll thank you again for
Thank
your
you.
presentation. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak to us today? Please let us have your name and address, ma'am. You have 10 minutes inclusive of questions, and begin when you're ready.
Thank you. My name is Naomi Sanderson and I live at 265 Erie Avenue, just directly across the way. So I actually is my first time home buyer and purchased the house with my sister and my fiance in July of this year. So very new to the neighborhood, but have really enjoyed it so far. This is a bit, personal. I know this, I don't want to waste anybody's time here, but one of the main reasonings for our intention to move to that neighborhood was the history and the beauty of the neighborhood itself. One of a big selling features was actually, I look out every day at that house. It's directly outside of my bedroom. I watch the dogs of the current family running every morning, the trees, the canopy that it provides. And so at a personal level, it's very disappointing, especially, we hope to be in this community for a long time, and to see that kind of change, especially so early on in our time here, was a difficult letter to receive in the mail. So, and as someone who's very familiar with the housing crisis and the battle it took to get to where we are today, and having to buy with my sister as well as my partner, in order to afford a house, you work so hard, and I feel to see something like an apartment building go up across the way, that necessarily isn't helping the housing crisis. Probably I rented for many years, and market rent is not necessarily affordable. So it's difficult because I know we are in a time where there's more people coming to the city and there's the need of more homes, but I do not think a condo building necessarily is necessarily mitigating that the concern we have. And I think it could. I share similar concerns with the parking and all that situation. And something I did want to raise that I don't believe has been necessarily discussed today, and I may not be the best representative to speak to it, but I am curious if the First Nations has been involved at all with this proposal, and if they've been at the table of the discussions, because I'm not sure if I know when purchasing our land that there are there's a lot of history there, and there's a lot of involvement in the land. So I just would be curious to know if they've been consulted, if they've been involved, and if there's any kind of anything's been heard from the First Nations about this matter. That's really all I have to share. I don't want to waste anybody's time. Thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you very much, and you're not wasting anybody's time. Questions, committee members? Seeing, oh, there we go. Councillor Carpenter, go ahead.
Just a quick, welcome to Brantford.
Thank you. Excited to be here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you again. And thank you for an excellent question, Councillor Carpenter. Folks, anybody else want to come up and speak? Please come up, sir. Tell us your name and address, and you have 10 minutes inclusive of any questions.
Oh, there we go. Hey, my name is Ryan Hill. I'm at 128 Minturn Avenue. Similar to the last lady, we're first-time home buyers. We bought in May. That's besides the point, though. I only have one question. I'm just wondering where they're going to be storing the garbage. Is it going to be off of the building, or just where the location is? Because I don't want to really smell the garbage storage. But that's it.
Thank you for that, sir. And staff and the proponent have written that down, and one of them will answer that question for you because it's an easy one. Anyone else in the audience care to speak today? Going once? Going twice? Last call. Thank you very much. Let me refer to my notes now. So the proponent, is there anything you'd like to clarify, including some of the questions asked by members of the public? If so, come on up. Or feel free not to. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks, Sean. Okay, so I'll start with, we heard a lot of comments again about traffic and parking, and I think those questions have been answered by staff, but perhaps staff could be reiterating some of the answers to those. But just in a high level response with respect to the parking, the numbers that are proposed have been confirmed by your own staff that are sufficient for apartment buildings. In addition, the traffic in the area, just to reiterate again, the road has been designed to accommodate 20,000 vehicles a day, with current practices being approximately 11,000 trips a day. Even if this development should increase the traffic by 200 something vehicles a day, that is well below what the road has been designed for. With respect to the snow removal, that is a valid concern. I understand people are concerned about this. And as a property owner, my client too will want to remove that because, as everybody here understands, there are only a certain number of parking spaces available. So we certainly don't want to lose those parking spaces. And that's something that is worked out with city staff during the site plan approval process. In all likelihood, the snow removal will be done through a private removal company, and it'll be removed after the snowfall, because obviously we want to ensure that the tenants within the building will have their own parking spaces. So that is a concern that I think as a property owner, the owner would also want to ensure that that is done expeditiously. With respect to the noise issue has been addressed. With respect to the warning clauses in schools, I can assure you, through my previous employer, I was a city planner at the City of Kitchener for 15 years. And during that time, I have come across the school warning clause numerous times, because like Brantford is now experiencing at this school and perhaps at others as well, City of Kitchener, both the Catholic and the public school boards within the region of Waterloo have been experiencing this for quite some time, and it is not uncommon to have those kind of warning clauses put on title. So, and perhaps your own staff can attest to it as well, but in my experience, that has happened elsewhere. With respect to compatibility, compatibility doesn't mean that the building has to be the same. And that said, the building height, originally, the client considered a 5-story building. It's come down 1 story. In my presentation, I mentioned that the building that's on site today, while an older building, is approximately, I believe, between 12 and 12 and a half meters in height right now, and this building is being proposed at around 14 and a half. So it's not a significant increase. Yes, it's a different form of building, and it's going to cover the lot in a different way than this building does. But in terms of its overall height, it's not much higher than the existing building. With respect to, I'm trying to find what other comments were here. The busing of kids, that's something that the school board will have to dictate. They also determine where the children are picked up from, and so that I don't know that that's really something that is resultant from this development. And we did hear that the First Nations were notified as part of the agreement that you have with the First Nations folks, but I will let your city staff address that. I think those are all and there was another question about the value of homes. My experience too as a city planner for many, many years is that the MPAC determines the assessed value. It determines the value of your homes. And MPAC considers up to 200 different criteria that could impact the appraised value of homes in an area. And sometimes new development can actually have the opposite effect of appraising towards a home, and may actually increase property values in an area when there's new development throughout the area. That's been my experience. I'm certainly not an expert, but that's all I want to say. I think I've covered most of the questions that were raised.
Can you also tell us where the garbage?
Oh, yes. And sorry, I apologize for that. Yes, and in terms of the garbage, it's also a detail that's worked out during the site plan approval process. In many of the developments that we're involved in, a lot of times the proponents consider Moloch garbage. So those are the ones that are buried, and then they have like a cap over them, so you don't have like the bins open and flying around. So I believe that this is something that our client would likely consider for this type of development. It's cleaner. It also keeps animals away and things of that nature. So it's something that can be decided at the site plan approval stage with conversations with the city staff. So
Thank you very much.
you're welcome.
Members of committee, we are out of time on this one. I'm going to suggest that we take a short break and reconvene at say 11:05, if that's okay with everybody. Okay, we'll see you all back here in a few minutes. Okay, folks, we're going to reconvene now. So our public meeting is closed. Councilor Carpenter has had to leave to attend another meeting. May I get a mover and seconder to get item 4.1 on the floor, moved by Councilor Celeste, seconded by Councilor Van Tilburg. Does somebody want to read that? Who's the mover? Councilor Celeste, go ahead and read that lengthy description, please. Do you need it on the screen? There it is.
Okay, I've got it here as well, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair.
okay.
That zoning bylaw amendment application PZ-14-23 submitted by MHBC Planning on behalf of Ideal Capital, affecting the lands municipally known as 264 Erie Avenue, to change the zoning to residential medium density type B, exception 32 zone RB4 or R4B rather dash 32 to permit a 47 unit apartment building be approved subject to the application of a holding provision and in accordance with the applicable provisions outlined in section 9.2 of report 2023-623, and that the bylaw to remove the holding H provision from the subject lands not be presented to council for approval until the applicant has submitted a stage 1 archaeological assessment and the subsequent assessments as required by the Ministry of Citizenship, Multiculturalism Standard and Guidelines for consultant archaeologists as amended from time to time, as well as copies of all letters from the Ministry of Citizenship and Multiculturalism verifying that the archaeological assessments have been entered into the Ontario Public Register of Archaeological Reports to the satisfaction of the Chief Planner, and that pursuant to section 3418.2 of the Planning Act RSO 1990, the following statement shall be included in the notice of decision. Regard has been made for all written and oral submissions received from the public before the decision was made in relation to this planning matter as discussed in section 9.4 report 2023-623. Mr. Chair.
Well read, Councilor Celeste. Thank you kindly. So the matter is now before us for discussion, question, and debate. I have Councilor Sokoli, then Councilor Van Tilburg. Go ahead, Councilor Sokoli.
Yes, thank you. I'm told to, or I was asked to ask about the 36-inch doors, and providing 36-inch doors within a building adds to the accessibility of the building. Are there any plans to provide accessible doorways? Does anyone know? Or can I leave that with the consultant to explore? Is that fair? Perfect. I do want to comment to the consultant's discussion about MPAC and the valuation of a home. And I just want to make it clear that the MPAC valuation of a home has absolutely nothing to do with the market value of a home. And I can attest to that in my profession outside of this role. So there will likely be some impact to value of home. Okay. In saying that, I do think this building is completely appropriate for an intensification corridor. Okay. And having different types of housing in a neighborhood does create an eclectic community within a community. And we can't say that a 4-story neighborhood is inappropriate here when I have a 8-story building on Conklin and Shellard amongst thousands and thousands of single-family detached homes. So I do think it's appropriate, but where I'm concerned and where I'm at a bit of a roadblock is when I'm looking at this property, it just looks to me like there could be some heritage significance to it. And just because it's not in the register, I do think that it warrants some further exploration of it. And I understand there's probably going to be more discussion on that coming forward, but I do think it's worthwhile for us to take our time with this property and have a look at the building itself, just to make sure that there's no, we're not missing anything as far as our heritage is concerned here in the community. So I'll put a pin in it for now and let the ward councillor speak next.
Thank you, Councilor. Do members of the committee have any objection to letting Councilor Van Tilburg introduce his amendments in the first speaking opportunity? Counselor, you have the leave to do that if you wish. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I have an amendment that the Heritage Committee be consulted regarding the inclusion of 264 Erie Ave on the Heritage Register. And B, that the following consultation with the Brantford Heritage Committee, that 264 Erie Ave be included on the Heritage Register because of its design has value as representative example of the Queen Anne revival style of architecture. And I also have a clause C that I wish to bring forward, that a heritage impact study be requested and a holding provision be in place until such time, which would be similar to the archaeological holding provision we have currently on. We held a public meeting a month ago and in front of everybody, of course, everybody lives in the area, but right on the front screen is this, what the local community refers to as the castle. And an amazing property that its visual aspect provides a quality of life to the community. It's very uplifting and it gives everyone a good vibe, and which is probably one of the main reasons why that public meeting was so well attended. And it was very hard as a counselor to stand up there and say, reaffirming staff's comments that it was not part of the Heritage Registry and considered, because everyone's there saying, what, do my eyes deceive me? Because it's physically there. So I would like that relooked upon, and that's the purpose of this amendment to the plan.
Counselor, thank you. Did the clerk capture the amendments? Okay. I'm just going to ask the committee, would the committee prefer to deal with them individually or speak to the omnibus amendment? The whole thing. Okay, fair enough. Counselor Sluss, who happens to be the seconder, has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could, through you to staff, I'm not clear. The amendment asks that it be sent to the Heritage Committee to be considered to be put on the registry. What does that do?
So through the chair, Patrick Vuser, intermediate planner, long range planning, and handling the heritage portfolio. So under the act, council can list a property if it meets a certain criteria, 1 of 9, but council would have to consult the Brantford Heritage Committee. So the amendment would send an item onto the Heritage Committee agenda. There'd be a report back to council, and then at council's discretion, the property could be added on the register.
It would be on a register. It would not be designated, correct?
Correct.
So when it's on the registry, what does that, it protects the property, but only to a certain extent. Can you explain that, please?
Yeah, so when a property is listed on the register, the owner has to provide the city with 60 days notice in writing that they intend to demolish the building. Other than that, there's no heritage permits, there's no review of alterations, just the demolition.
So really what it does, it postpones the inevitable for 60 days.
Through the chair, it gives council a chance to consider going forward with a designation.
Right. And that would have to take place, I guess, and be considered within that time frame.
Correct.
Okay. I think that's it for now, but I might have something else. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Let me just speak to the amendment. I think it's appropriate. That's not to say staff haven't followed the rules and procedures to the T in this. It's not on the register currently. It's not designated currently. So in not appearing before the Heritage Committee, that was a delegated responsibility that staff assumed a number of years ago. But I think Councillor Van Tilburg's amendment is quite appropriate. It has value. It has cultural value. It has heritage significance in my view. And I've had the heritage file for a number of years, although I'm enjoying a sojourn. So I'm quite happy to support this. And I would hope that that this may have an impact with respect to perhaps leading to a designation of this property at a later date. Further discussion, comments on the amendment? I don't see any, so we'll go to the vote on the amendment. Could we have that up on the screen as well, please?
The amendment carries on a recorded vote of 4-0. Those voting in favor, Counselor Secoli, Sless, McCreary, Van Tilburg.
Thank you, committee. We're now back to discussion, questions, comments with respect to the resolution as amended by Brian Van Tilburg's amendment. Further discussion. Counselor Sless, followed by Counselor Van Tilburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. These are always catch-22 situations. And it's uncomfortable to be put into these positions, but we are constantly, because the alternative is if the application is turned down, the proponent has the right to appeal to the OLT. And when they appeal to the OLT, the game changes dramatically. For those not familiar, the OLT is a former OMB, which is an Ontario-wide body that makes decisions on planning matters that couldn't be resolved locally. And every property owner has the right to appeal to them for whatever it is that they're seeking to do with their property. When it goes to the OLT, it can change. You can end up with a 6-story building. Even though that wasn't applied for, they can change it and they can get a 6-story building or whatever it is they apply for. They can be approved by the OLT. History tells us the OLT is very pro-development. I can't remember one being turned down. So those are the things that concern me and bother me in turning things down or not turning things down. I've always been of the opinion that it's best to negotiate the best deal you can locally and live with that than it is to put your fortunes in the hands of someone that knows nothing of the city of Brantford, doesn't want to know nothing of the city of Brantford, and simply has to make a planning decision in Toronto. That scares me. And I've seen the results of that in a number of occasions where we really didn't like something. We couldn't negotiate something that we felt was palatable. It got sent there and we got dealt a worse hand than we went into the game with. So I guess having said all of that, reluctantly, I feel compelled to support it. And hopefully we have a, no, I'm losing the term in my mind, the process that we go through. Oh my gosh. Sorry. Site plan approval process that this would have to go through. That process is staff driven, but it's also politically sensitive. The ward councillors representing the folks in Ward 5 are present, and their opinions are heard, and their opinions are for the most part complied with. So I'll put my faith in the hands of Councillor Van Tilburg and Councillor the other one, Samuel, and hopefully they can negotiate through that process the things that will make this not acceptable, but more compatible to the wishes of the people that they serve. So at this point, I usually say I'll be interested to see how I vote on this, but I think I would have to support it, given that the alternative could be far worse. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sless. And Councillor Van Tilburg, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I will not be supporting this development. I believe that the proposed development offends the character of the neighborhood. And I sincerely believe that. Sometimes, you just see a group and it's just not in my backyard, but I believe when you look at this particular piece of land, its background, its history, its visual value to the community, and that we had another proposals literally blocks away without the backlash that this particular one has done. And that's another big, and it's not an intensification, but it's 27 units stuck in with townhouses. Literally a couple blocks away, and there was no major pushback on it. It wasn't like the community was saying this is terrible. They have the same concerns about our road, that the fact that that's a 2-lane road as a minor artery into the city, and yet we're almost trying to start treating it like it's going to be a major artery without first creating one. The neighborhood was very consistent on what they wanted to see. And that would be something better. Either no change or build something that's better. Even in the visual appeal of this building, it is strictly a rectangular apartment building. It will likely have a large HVAC unit at the top of it, providing all the heating and air conditioning and all that stuff, and that noise will be resonating amongst the neighbors. When we do the other style of proposals, they do intensify and they do somewhat keep to the, I think what Eagle Place has been very compatible with throughout the years. When I think of other buildings, I can't, in the nearby vicinity, I don't see anything else that is like this. And the concern to me is that while we've been approving other builds that are more in the single family home mindset or townhouse mindset, this could actually continue as buildings like this all up and down the strip of Erie Ave. And I don't think that that was actually what we sincerely meant in that intensification. And I don't think that when we do intensification, just because we set aside, and I mean, we do things as in one size fits all. So we have an area that says we want to do this. It doesn't mean that we have to do it in this location. There are other locations along there. There may be better spots, but there's no reason that says we have to change the visual aspects and looks of what the community has so admired throughout their lifetime, quite frankly. I mean, we had people of all ages coming out to question this particular development. I do understand very clearly Councillor Sleth's position on going to the OLT. That does put the ball in somebody else's hands. He is absolutely correct. It is best to keep it in our hands. The heritage aspect is hopefully a reflection of that to some degree. We'll see what happens as we go forward. But I still can't, like, just because he's correct, I can't support this. I don't think it's a good fit. I don't think I cannot go against what the community that have great wisdom. Many of the same people who came to actually support a couple large developments that go along Erie Ave. And then in this one, they say, no, this, you can't, don't do this one. This is wrong. So I have to agree with them and I won't be supporting it.
Councillor, thank you very much. And you timed that to within 1 second of the 4-minute speaking limit. Further discussion. Seeing no one in the queue, let me say this. What we have in our laps today is a manifest failure by senior levels of government to accommodate the needs of housing for people disadvantaged in this country. And yet we continue to welcome 500,000 new folks every year. It's foolishness. And, you know, like legalizing dope, this all lands in our lap eventually. And the consequence is that we are forced to accept developments in our community that completely ruin single family neighborhoods. And this is a prime example of that. I wouldn't have supported this today, but for Councillor Van Tilburg's amendment, which offers light at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully it's not a locomotive. Councillor Sleth spoke to getting the best deal we can, and this may not look like much of a best deal scenario, but as he said, it could be a lot worse. I guess, you know, we're seeing the chickens come home to roost with respect to our designation of some streets as intensification corridors. And I agree with most of the folks that have spoken today that traffic on that street is woefully inadequate in terms of our ability to widen the road. We're stuck with 2 lanes. So the more we add on there, the worse that gets. And this will probably just be the first of a number of proposals that we'll see that come at us. And the neighborhood will change in such a way that this eventually will be compatible with the neighborhood because a lot of the single family homes will be gone. So I'm thankful to Councillor Van Tilburg for improving what's before us today. This will work its way through our heritage committee. There will be a heritage impact assessment as well as the archaeology So there may be, there may be an opportunity for this developer to find another location to build their project within the same neighborhood. Last call for speakers on this item. Let's go to the vote.
Item 4.1 carries on a recorded vote of 3-1. Those voting in favor, Counselor Secoli, McCreary. Those opposed, Counselor Van Tilburg.
Thank you for that. We have no notice of motion before us. I want to thank everybody for their participation today. Our meeting is now concluded and we are adjourned.